So welcome everyone to the fifth session of Informatica Cloud Tech Tuesdays. Today we're going to be focusing on SOAP web services and using that within the Informatica Cloud application. Joining me today is Brian Plaster, who essentially heads the entire Cloud Labs and Cloud Customer Success Group, and he's been with Informatica now almost 5 years, and he was the person that actually started our entire Cloud Labs team. So a lot of the new connectors you see coming out of Informatica Cloud are from that particular team. So we're very happy to have him with us today. So let's go over today's agenda. We're essentially going to go over a brief primer of web services. Then we're going to go a little bit into what SOAP web services consists of. And then we're going to jump into a demo where Brian will be showing us how to use a SOAP web service within Informatica Cloud. After that, we'll be having a brief summary of what we learned and then going into a question and answer session. So anytime you feel the need to ask a question, please type it into the chat panel and we'll answer it towards the end. After that, we're just going to go over the next Tech Tuesday session and then wrap up. So we look at where web services fits in the concept of communications overall. You'll see that back in the day, you had protocols such as SMTP and POP3 and IMAP used for email. You had Telnet to talk with the computer. You had FTP for file transfers. And HTTP was the format that was most optimized for data. Now, a web service, as you know, can be either SOAP or REST-based, and the payload can be in either XML or JSON. So XML is the format that is most common for SOAP-based web services. And because HTTP is optimized for data, that's also used by a lot of the web services message formats. And as far as JSON, it's actually a newer, lightweight data format, and that's used only for REST-based web services. And we'll be having a session on REST-based web services in October. So we'll send you out details regarding that in the next few weeks. Now, let's dive into SOAP web services and what they consist of. So essentially, they can be of two types. They can be either procedural or they can be document style. Now, a procedural style is where you have a remote procedure call encoded, whereby you can call the kind of data you need by the name of the procedure. And a procedural call, you generally ask for a certain data type that you want to use within the integration workflow. In a document style SOAP web service is a little bit more complex. So the difference between a document style and a procedural style web service at a high level is that with the document style, you need the XSD schema and you need the WSDL, whereas with a procedural web service, you would only need the WSDL. You don't need the XSD schema. So with a document-style web service, you need to create an XML message with all the required information. And that request gets sent within the SOAP envelope, and you get the information back also in XML. And of course, all SOAP web services do require a WSDL, which is known as the Web Services Description Language. And the main reason for this is because the WSDL generates whatever required code you need automatically. So with that, I'm now going to hand the reins over to Brian Plaster, who is going to take us through a demo of Informatica Cloud and how to use a SOAP web service within Informatica Cloud.
So today we're going to talk about, as Ashwin said, the web services, and I actually have a real one here that I wanted to show you. So this is our orders web service, and the neat thing about this particular web service, it's actually what we use in our training class to really show people how to get a lot of value out of Informatica Cloud with web services. The WSDL that Ashwin was talking about is basically an XML document that describes what we're going to do. So I want to show you guys, and I think on Tech Tuesday you guys are all interested in going deep, and we're going to roll up our sleeves and discuss this as deep as we can. and ask questions as we go. So this is the WSDL, and so the things in our web service are things like get orders, get account orders, and you pass in the account ID to figure out the orders for which account, and then you get back an array of orders, right? So now at the bottom here in our WSDL, remember this is self-describing. It really describes the web service and what you're going to get from it, what you give and what you get. So this is the technical view: get account orders, pass in account ID, get back an order, and then the order is described as account name, account ID, number, total, type. Right, so lucky for us in our training environment here, we actually have the same thing. So you have these different methods that you're going to use. So if I want to do get account orders, it asks me for that account ID, just like the WSDL will explain. And it's going to return me back for that account a list of the different orders and what their value is. Right, so this is what we expect Informatica Cloud to do with the web service, same type of thing. All right, so let's go into Informatica Cloud, and this is actually pretty easy to set up. So let me go and make a connection to our web service. So if you remember when we looked at the WSDL, it's actually a URL with different WSDLs made by different people are a little bit different, but you have this URL that you're going to focus on. And you put in the Informatica Cloud connection for the web service, you're going to put the WSDL URL in its full, and then you're going to put something called the endpoint URL. Right? And I expect everybody to go try this with your own web service after we get done with this webinar. So a little trick is the WSDL URL. You should know that pretty public. The endpoint URL, if you don't have it, it's going to be in the WSDL, right? Because the WSDL describes exactly what the web service can do, including where it's at. So this is, they call it a service name through a binding, and you can go to the bottom of the WSDL, any WSDL, and figure out where to send that data to. All right, so back to our connection. That's really all you have to do. This header and body path are real interesting. That's some of the advanced configuration. We'll get into that in about 10 minutes as far as how to, in batch integration, send a whole lot of stuff to that web service and request and response and really succeed with a high volumes of data. So we'll cover that in a minute. But basically, to set up your connection, you put it in the WSDL and the endpoint, and you're ready to go. So let's go ahead and build a task using this new connection that we just set up. Right, so I can come over here and build a new task. I can go get accounts. I think I'm on version 4 or so. And let's say that we want to put those into Salesforce, right? So as far as if I wasn't talking, and I talk a lot, we could actually have this thing done in about 3 minutes. But let's go ahead and walk through getting all the accounts from our system that's basically exposed by a web service and putting them into Salesforce. So in this 5-step wizard with Informatica Cloud, the first step is just give it a name and tell it what you want to do to the source system. We're going to upsert into Salesforce. Our source is just what it means. It's where we're getting the data from. So we're going to get it from that web service in this case. So this is the connection that I set up over here, or training web service. It represents accounts and orders in our system. And then just like we saw with the orders web service, the way that it down in the WSDL and then also in that test screen, that's what we get in Informatica Cloud. So it's really transparent that you see exactly the capabilities of this web service. So the capabilities are I can add an order, I can get orders for that account, I can get all account, recent accounts, order status. Right, so it's real nice. So this really lines up and makes it easy to use. So you went from the very complicated WSDL, right, which we'll have. We have a screen that really describes exactly what operations this WSDL supports. And then in Informatica Cloud, we can simply pick that. All right, so let's get all accounts, get a nice preview of the data. Now, as far as putting this into our Salesforce, remember our 5-step wizard, well, 6-step wizard, actually. The source is defining the web service and the method that you want. The target is going to be where we're going to put the data. So I'm going to take the data and I'm going to put it in my Salesforce. We have a lot of different types of systems here, but I'm going to put it in Salesforce account because I'm taking all the accounts from my my ERP system. I remember I said get accounts with the web service. I'm going to put them into Salesforce account. So now if I had some filters, I'm doing all accounts, but I'll show you this in a minute. If I have some filters, I could put that in and specify which ones I want. I can go to my field mapping, and this is kind of where some of the magic happens, right? I mean, it's kind of nice that I can take a look at, the different parts of the web service. And, this started off as a very complicated wizard that describes it, but Informatica Cloud made it easy. So I can take my account name and drag it over here. Working my way down the list, I have account ID. This is going to be my external ID in Salesforce, right? So that means that I did upsert. I can update that account if it's there and insert if it's not. Working my way down the list, there's my area code and phone number. So let's go back up to this section with the billing information. And here's my phone number. And I'm just basically dragging information. There's my billing street. Let's go ahead and finish this up in just a second. Billing city, billing state. Ashwan, any questions while I'm finishing up this mapping? Just take another 10 seconds.
So far, no questions yet.
Okay, cool. So you guys feel free to ask whatever you want. There you go. All right, so we basically has mapped our account web service. We've done the name, the address, phone number, and then where to put it in Salesforce. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and run this guy. And now one of the things that we saw on our web service, when I go to get all accounts, one of those accounts is Tyco, right? So these are the same accounts that you see in Salesforce when you're, let me see if I can get it before it updates. There you go. So Salesforce has about 10 default accounts in the developer edition. And so basically I had erased some of these. I put them in the web service. There's no Tyco right now, but our integration's running. And just ran. So now we should be able to go search and find this Tyco. Actually, let me go. Sometimes it takes about 20 seconds with Force.com to update. And I can get all my different accounts, right? So there's Tyco right there. And I can see that I just modified it a second ago. Right, there's my address, my phone number, external ID. Right, so this is really quick to grab that data from the web service. This is account data and put it into Salesforce. Right, so let's take it a step further, right? So, we just basically took all the data, and it's only 12 records in my test system, but what if you had a million, right? It could be a whole lot of records. So let's go take a look at another task that I had to add to filter that data. Right, and what I mean by that is I don't want all the records, I just want some. Or I want orders for a certain accounts. Right, a lot of options you can do. So if we go into our recent accounts, right, this is another task that I made. And basically on my source, instead of doing get all accounts, I said just give me the recent ones, right, by a date. Right, so once again, a lot of web services might have 100 things here. Most of them, have 10 or 20. Or 4 or 5, right? So you can say, give me a recent account, put them in the same place in my target. Now this is kind of neat that I can actually, let me show you how this works. If I want to filter the data, so I know that get recent accounts has some ways to filter it down. So one of the things I can do is by last modified date. Right, so I can go last modified date, and I can do greater than or equal to 1/1/2013, right? So give me everything this year. Right, I can do the same thing with orders. I can do the same thing with, whatever that web service supports. And then the field mapping is the same. So this allows me to get updates out of my web service, to pull changes. All right, so it's really kind of exciting, really how easy it is to do this with Informatica Cloud. Sorry, I have thought I showed that down. Now, there's one more way that we can run these different filters. Like, so for example, I was able to pick a pretty simple, let me give everything by this date, but what if you had a list of, 1,000 accounts that you wanted to get update from, and it was a certain ones, right? So what you can do in Informatica Cloud is you can make a task before this one that updates a file that has a list of all the different accounts in it. And then from there, you can actually go through that list one by one for some heavy batch processing and bring them all over. All right, so my get recent accounts, instead of 12, I got 11 because I had one that was updated last year and not this year. But let's take a look at our next scenario where we're actually going to put it in a file. All right, so I have an example over here, get a recent accounts 2. And this is where those header and body CSVs come in. All right, so in this case, I'm going to go to my source, and then I'm going to take a look at my connection. Let's take a look at where those files are. So it's pretty neat in Informatica Cloud. You have a very purpose-built task that you create, and then you run them together in a task flow. So, for example, I have this header and body CSV. So this allows me to, in significant batch transactions, to be able to do a whole bunch of records at once. And so when I put these different tasks in here, and we're going deep as TechTuesday, it actually creates files that have the same filter expressions that we looked at earlier. All right, so for example, I wanted to call this web service with 20 different dates. I would just put 20 different records in here. And I would do that automatically, so as a nice part of a task flow, we could simply add in all the records that we want to update the web service with, and then update it next. So this is kind of a neat concept that we can do to really make it easy to use. And then in the data filter, you just describe where that file is that you want to update. So remember, two-step process. You go into a task flow, and the first step is to update that file. The second step is to run that batch as big as it is, which is pretty neat to do. So let me show you guys how task flow works. My batch web service update. All right, so you just bring it in here, and I can add, maybe the first step is the bulk, and then the second step would be the web service. And there's a whole lot of tasks on here. I think I called mine, that was it right there, get accounts. Right, and then you run this, and it's a two-step process. It could be a 100-step process. We have some customers that do 150-step process. It's crazy, right? So it's kind of nice that you have purpose-built integration tasks. They're in dependent order, and this is how you can build as complicated integration as you'd like. All right, so thank you guys for joining. I think we have a few questions, Q&A session. We wanted to wrap up. We're trying to keep this under 30 minutes. We want to wrap up with some more best practices. And Ashwin, why don't you take it from here?
Great. Thanks a lot, Brian. So before we get into Q&A sessions, there were a couple of questions. But before that, I want to go over some of the TechTuesday tips for success with regards to SOAP web services. So you all saw the great demo that Brian did. And when you get started with the SOAP web services connector, make sure to please fill in all the relevant fields. Your endpoint URL, your header CSV path, the body CSV path. Especially important is the WSDL URL, the download path for the attachment, and the authentication type. And you can use the auto CSV file creation to create the initial filter files, and then you can change it back to manual so the data inputs do not get overwritten. So that's a very, very important thing to note when you're creating a SOAP web service. And if you ever want to pass parameters into your SOAP web service, you can use the filter feature to handle multiple requests in one task itself. So if you want to learn more about how to use the SOAP web service in great detail, we do have documentation on our Informatica Cloud community site, and that is the URL to go retrieve it. So with that, I'm now going to jump into the Q&A session. And there were several ones that came in, Brian, especially when you're doing the field mapping stage, when you're dragging and dropping between the SOAP web service and Salesforce. There was a question there around how many levels of parent-child relationships can you handle when using a SOAP web service?
Oh, that's a good question. So a lot of times you might have multiple levels. In our account scenario, maybe you have an account list, and then in that account list you have contacts, and then in those contacts you have addresses, right? So you have multiple levels of parent-child relationship. So the way that would be broken down with Informatica Cloud Web Service Connector would be you would show those in that list in the course. So the first thing you would do would be add your accounts in. The second thing you do, a second task. Remember we talked about purpose-built tasks in dependent order. The second task would bring in the contacts and relate them to the account in your target. And then you would bring in the addresses thirdly and relate them to the contacts. So it's pretty simple to take a complex problem and really simplify it, right? So if you look at XML hierarchy, you saw the WSDL that I showed. It was fairly complicated. XML documents are as well, but you can break them down very easily with Informatica Cloud by just breaking the big part into little parts, and you can go as deep as you want to go. Did that answer your question,
Awesome. Thanks,
Ashwin?
Ron. Yeah. So the other question is around authentication mechanisms. So what kind of authentication mechanisms do we support?
Well, so web services are real interesting because they have quite a few different kinds, over the years that different people have tried. Some better than others. Some of my favorite easy ways to authenticate are, for example, username and password in the header. So you saw that when we were creating the filter, it not only had input data parameters, but it also had some of those extra parameters you might want to add in the header. So you can put your username and password there. For example, we use the Strike Iron web service, and that one works that way, where the username and password are secured in the header. Other ways that you can do is we support the WSSE authentication. All right, so that's kind of a neat. I kind of would call it old style. It's WSSE user token authentication or digital signature authentication. And then also if there's certificates involved with the secure transport of the web service, we support that as well. So I think we hit the heavy authentication types for the web service pretty easily with Informatica Cloud Web Service Connector.
Great, thanks for that. The question is now about using a web service versus building a native connector from scratch. So I guess, Brian, what is the line beyond which you'd go ahead and just build a native connector to an application you're connecting to versus just using a SOAP web service to connect to that particular application?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah. So yeah, we have a connector toolkit that's available for everybody, where you can actually build a connector to any system to show up as a source or target, and that's actually what we did to build this web service connector. So as far as the delineation between when you'd want to build it, when you build a connector with the connector toolkit, of course that's a development effort you have to go under, and that takes a couple weeks to do. That allows you to represent the schema of that system in your own way. So for example, you could have a list of things like accounts, orders, order detail line. Whereas when you have a generic web service, I think you guys saw, you do have that delineation, but it's a little bit more generic because Informatica Cloud had to figure out that web service and display it back to you. So for example, we have, it was like orders web service accounts, orders web service orders. Right, so I think that becomes a little bit more technical in nature, and then on the mapping, the field names are longer because they represent the hierarchy that we described earlier. So I think the line is usually a lot of times people have an internal web service that another department might have made. They can use a web service connector. Maybe there's a kind of a best-of-breed SaaS application that we haven't gotten to yet with Informatica Cloud. We have about 40 connectors, but there's thousands of applications out there. So if you want to get started with that web service right away, you can use the web service connector to connect to that. And then as far as the other way, building it with a connector toolkit. Like I mentioned, we have over 40 connectors that we've built, partners have built, even customers have built, that really represent those other systems, and we're always adding them every day. But it's a delineation of, first, do I have a connector for that system? No, let's use the web service and get this thing going right away in the next 5 minutes. Maybe you want integration to be built for another user to use Informatica Cloud. That's another reason for services, or for a connector to be built so that somebody can easily go and just pick things like that account and order out of there and integrate. So it's kind of an internal decision how you want to do it. But I think we have both ways. We have a lot of connectors. We have a way to build connectors, and then we also have web services, REST, and XML for all those custom systems that you might want to access. So with Informatica Cloud, you can do it all.
Great. Thanks for that, Brian. The other question is really, I guess, more of a high-level one. It's about when to use SOAP versus a REST web service. It's actually a two-part question. When to use SOAP versus a REST web service, and then I guess the difference between JSON and XML.
Okay, so kind of a two-part question. So I think we're going to cover REST in just a couple weeks, and that might be myself doing that as well. So when to use SOAP over REST really depends on the system that you want to connect to. So if you have the decision of building an API for your system, that's a whole nother discussion. But I think for integration with an existing system, they're almost always going to offer one or the other, right? So someone's going to offer a SOAP API or a REST API, and then you pick the one you want. If there's a choice between each one, I usually like the REST a little bit better because it's lighter weight and they're a newer style. So I guess if I was really going to pick, I might do the REST because it's also easier to kind of see the request and response and work on it as you go. And then the second question about JSON versus XML. So most of the REST APIs, it's kind of the newer kind of web service. With the REST APIs, a lot of times those will offer both JSON and XML. So XML and JSON really just represent your data. XML is a little bit, I would call it fatter, because it has more tags that represents the data, and the messages get big. Whereas JSON is the same data, but it's streamlined to be very, very small. So the representation of the data doesn't have as many tags. It's a lot more condensed, and a lot of folks would go down that road. So it's almost a religious question that you would ask. But as far as Informatica Cloud, we made sure that we can support whatever system it is that you're trying to connect to. That's our plan.
Awesome. So we are coming up to the top of the hour. So I just want to wrap up with some of the next steps with regards to Tech Tuesdays. So we've all seen Brian's demo on the SOAP Web Services connector. So if you want to try it out yourself, just go to Informatica Cloud and log in, and go ahead and download this particular connector into your account. So it will be called Web Services, and we'll have this symbol on it. So go ahead and download that to your account. Then definitely join the Informatica Cloud community, where you'll see other users also using the Web Services connector, and you can join in the discussion. And just a reminder that the next Tech Tuesday session will not be happening next Tuesday, but rather on September the 10th, and it's going to be on cloud integration templates. So thanks once again for joining us for this particular session of SOAP Web Services and Informatica Cloud Tech Tuesdays. See you next time on September the 10th. Thank you.